Okay, Richard, I think you've got the streaming control now if you want to click the YouTube thing. Do you? Either that or it's gone away for me, but we'll get there. Anyway, my dog Gracie is welcoming all of you here. I want to read our land acknowledgement before starting in. We would like to acknowledge the Lenni Lenape people who are the original inhabitants of Lenape-Holking and the island of Mannahatta. The land the new school university is built upon, including all of New York City, present-day New Jersey, and eastern Pennsylvania, along the Delaware River watershed, western Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley, comprise Lenape ancestral homeland. This land was not ceded nor sold, as folklore would have us believe, to the Dutch for beads and trinkets. This land was forcibly taken through occupation by European settlers, resulting in displacement, forced migration, and genocide. In the present day, there are Lenape communities throughout North America, though much of the original Lenape territory remains under settler occupation and control. As settlers who have benefited from the colonization of sovereign land, we acknowledge our responsibility to examine and question systems of oppression that continue through to the present day and educate ourselves about the original stewards of this land. We also want to acknowledge the Haudenosaunee iron workers from the 6 nations of the Iroquois, mostly from the Mohawk tribe, whose labor built the many iconic skyscrapers and steel bridges in New York City. As recently as 2012, about 200 of the 2,000 structural iron workers in New York City were Mohawk. Every day we view the city skyline of Manhattan, we are reminded of their contribution. With that, I am super proud and always excited to welcome Emily and Theo from Design.io. Hey. They will introduce themselves, so I'm not going to say very much other than these are both DT grads, Emily from the MFA program and Theo, I believe, in the first class of the BFA program. The only story I'm going to tell and then hand it over to them is one of the first conversations I ever had with Theo in, I don't know, man, what was this, like 1999 or something, 2000, where he came into my office and said he was grudgingly willing to enter this new program, but under no circumstances would he ever consider doing any computer programming. And the rest is legendary, I'll say that. But anyway, for those who have not been at a cloud salon before, Emily and Theo will present for about the first 20 or 25 minutes. They can present whatever they want. And then we will open it up to all of you for questions. And you can enter your questions via chat or live if you're so inclined. We'll get to there about, I don't know, about 7:30-ish. So with that, I welcome Emily and Theo. Take it away.
Okay. Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Sven. Thanks, Richard. And thanks, Colleen. Let's see if this all works.
Okay. I'm Emily Gobeille, and this is Theo Watson, and we're the co-founders of Design.io.
We make immersive interactive installations, experimental data visualization tools, and we like to think about new ways to tell stories using technology. We're a team of 4 people currently. Nick Hardiman is our Minister of Interactive Art, and he's also a Parsons MFA DT grad. And Anna Cataldo is our producer and composer. We're based up in Petaluma, just north of San Francisco.
Which was news to Sven.
Yeah. And we make, our recent projects have included an interactive robot arm called Mimic, and a project that lets you explore the life cycle of stars with your hand called Remnant. And we thought we'd just kick it off with a little bit to show you a little bit of Remnant. You gather gases and matter together with your hand and then kind of can build up their mass until they become supergiants and explode. It's meant to be somewhere between a sort of science installation and a kind of more artistic kind of interpretation of the life cycle of stars. And then you make remnants with using through supernova explosions. And I don't know, let me turn up the volume a little bit. And those are the gravitational waves. I think it might be nice just to kind of get back to kind of how this all started. And that started at the DT department at Parsons School of Design. These were some pictures from kind of around when we were there, in the early 2000s. This is how I always think of Sven and Colleen and their kind of natural environments. Big inspirations for us and for kind of the spirit of the DT program, which was sort of more anarchistic than organized, I think, but in the right way.
Yeah. And during my time at Parsons, my focus was on interactive media for children and thinking about ways that interactivity could be used to enhance storytelling, where it didn't disrupt the flow of the narrative and it just really felt seamless. And my thesis project was an interactive DVD, which sounds silly now, but this was before iPads.
Cutting edge technology.
Oh, yeah.
And I was taking classes with Zach Lieberman. I was working on kind of understanding computer vision and how that could relate to interactive art. And my thesis project was an immersive audio experience where you could leave sounds floating in 3D space and then kind of locate them by kind of walking around the room with this very dapper headset. At the same time, I was also kind of experimenting with projector, kind of like using projectors to make surfaces kind of interactive and also feel kind of more magical. So this was like an early experiment, which I installed without permission on the 10th floor lobby called Daisies.
And Theo and I first met during a 24-hour game jam competition to design a game for the Atari 2600. And his team won, of course, rightfully so.
We were on rival teams.
Yeah.
This was the game we made called Ninja Garden. And I think the reason we won is because we didn't try and program a game AI. We just made the only 2-player game. So that really like kind of added a lot of complexity without having to do any extra work.
And after Parsons, we moved to Amsterdam. And during that time, I was working in motion graphics, and I was mainly still working remotely for companies back in New York. And we were just kind of trying to figure out our path at that time.
We were desperately trying to make a living, actually.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was working on open frameworks with Zach and a whole community of people that kind of came out of Parsons, and working with the Graffiti Research Lab on projects like laser tag, where you could draw graffiti on a building with a laser pointer. And I was also working on my own installations and sort of trying to sort of build up some sort of work making interactive installations. This was a project called Vinyl Workout, where you could walk around a record, and the faster you ran or moved, the faster the record would play. So beginning of Design.io.
Yeah. In 2007, when we were still in Amsterdam, this amazing children's festival called Cinekid got in touch and asked us to create something for their media lab. And we started thinking about things that we liked when we were children. And we knew that we wanted to kind of try to create a system that would support open play, where kids were kind of intrinsically motivated, like there wasn't a set objective or rules or rewards. It was just about kind of like exploring the system and discovering things and coming up with your own games and stories within it. So we came up with Funky Forest, which is an interactive ecosystem where you can create trees that took the shape of your body. And then you could use these physical logs to route water to the forest.
And I'll just show you a little clip of Funky Forest. We did the first version of this in 2007, and we just installed a new version of this this year or last year, and so it's still going strong. This was a version we did in Singapore at the Singapore Art Museum. And we really like with this project that there isn't like a set objective. You can, essentially we've built a system and children sort of tease it out, they play with it, they kind of create their own games and they create their own stories. And we're kind of just building something that supports that.
And our first install of this project was such like a kind of aha and mind-blowing experience in a way. It was like, oh, we actually got to see the like power of these types of experiences, and it sort of set the path for where we are today.
And we really like kind of experiences that aren't really tied to any particular age group or demographic. And so, we really love seeing adults, and this was a grandparent playing with his grandson. And this is a kind of good example of open play. Like the child has like got a ton of water to the trees using the logs, and now they want to find out what happens if they block the water from getting to the trees. And for us, that's just as valid an experience. And here the children sort of have found out that the creatures are afraid of you. And so they spend about half an hour chasing the creatures and trying to hit them. Eventually, I think they grab the logs and start whacking them with the...
But we always try to kind of design these multiple layers of interaction. So they're the ones that are more immediate and provide that type of feedback, and then others that reward more long-term exploration and feel like discoveries.
So jumping forward from Funky Forest, for the very first project we worked on, this is probably the biggest project we ever worked on. Connected Worlds is actually still running at the New York School of Science, and I think when they're allowed to open again, you can go and check it out there. We originally imagined multiple kind of Funky Forests connected together, and so we were telling NICEI about this, and they were like, hey, come have a look at this space. And we saw the space, and immediately we were like, oh my gosh, we could have like a giant waterfall at the end. Yeah. We could have these different biomes around the walls.
Because the original Funky Forest idea was like a series of interconnected installations. So what you did in one kind of environment had consequences in the other. And they really latched on to that idea. So we came up with this idea that it's like all of these sort of connected biomes.
Connected worlds. Sorry. And we wanted water to be central to the experience, because it was meant to be an installation around sustainability and resource management. And so we were kind of sketching out different ideas, but this idea of what happens when you run out of water, how do you negotiate kind of seeing the consequences of decisions made by individuals versus groups.
And also playing with the idea of too much and too little, and this kind of the trade-offs and balance was also a key part of this project.
This is sort of what it looked like when we were installing. It happened to be winter, so there was no heating in the space, so we were working with wearing thermal underwear, and we had a little tent. So this was I would call this extreme programming, but it felt really surreal to be writing code in this environment. And then this was once it was all constructed and finished.
And then we spent some time just kind of dialing in all of the graphics, aligning projectors.
And the vision system was pretty crazy. We had 3 infrared cameras with retroreflective logs, and we then had to map that across 7 floor projectors. So we, spent quite a bit of time getting everything aligned. Once it was sort of lined up, you could kind of see how big the interactive floor is. And the water is so kind of complex that it's actually quite a lot of work trying to get all the water to just the right places. So this is a little video of connected worlds. And there's like a mixture of habitats and kind of water sources. Oh, stops, yeah. The reservoir is like the last emergency water source. Rock rollers that like hang out in the river.
All of the creatures are kind of indicators of what's happening in the system. So like those rock rollers, when the desert would get too hot, they'd kind of roll over into the river to cool themselves off. But then the consequence of that is that then they block all the flow of the water.
In the environment, the children kind of shape the environment by what plants they add. And the environment uses more water if you have bigger plants. So you can kind of create an environment that's like a water hog, and then you have to sort of negotiate with other children because like, I need water, all my plants are dying. These are the little indicators that tell you that the plants are dying. It's one of my favorite moments. This boy, it's kind of amazing just seeing, like, in the same way with open play, the roles that people take on. And this boy was like feverishly working to just keep these creatures out of the river. And he's just like getting, like, he'd finally get them out and then they would roll right back. And
so Living Library is a large interactive book that works as a companion piece to Connected Worlds. And the idea is it's almost like a field guide where you can learn more about the creatures and the plants and the relationships between them, and just kind of get a deeper understanding of the system as a whole.
So I think there's like 20 or 30 pages, and each one has sort of animated content. And then we're doing hand tracking from above, so you can sort of trigger elements on the page. So we kind of wanted to make this sort of thing feel really magical. Here you can see a little bit of the debug view. Trying to detect hand touches on the page. And then the crazy marker matching. So we actually printed the markers, and then, you know, we would recognize the markers and then be able to switch the content. All right.
So the pack is a video game that we've finished more recently. And while we were working on Connected Worlds, there was talk about, like, how with the museum, how to bring this experience beyond the walls and what that would look like. And then a few years later, they came to us with the idea of framing. It was like computational thinking within the realm of environmental science was like the brief we were given.
And our kind of thought was, could we, like, instead of trying to teach kids how to write code, could we just teach them the sort of process of thinking computationally? Like, how do you break a problem down to steps? And actually, this was like something I experienced at Parsons, because I started working with Max MSP kind of, and what I realized is that Max MSP was teaching me not how to write code, but how to think about problems in the same sort of mindset. And then it made kind of going to code later, like, much easier. So this was our kind of optimistic goal of the project.
These are just some early sketches of some ideas that we had. And then we landed on this idea that, like, you're a creature with very limited abilities. So you kind of need to gather this pack of characters that each have a specific function that you can use together to help you. So we start the design, like, sketching process of what all those characters might be and what their functions are. So here's, like, you know, a creature that can bump into things, be a light source, grab things, dig, throw things.
And this is like kind of like an alpha that we kind of put together, and it looks very alpha-y, but and this was the only thing we haven't made in Open Frameworks. It was made in Unity. So this was a sort of like an alpha of discovering creatures and trying to you had to find creatures that could help you, and then you had to find the food that they wanted to eat in order for them to join your pack. So here I don't have the right food, so I have to go off and find that food.
And then after that, for the beta, we kind of wanted to like go more to the environmental side. So we started thinking about the creatures as environmental manipulators. So rather having functions like digging and throwing, it was more like heat and water, pollinators, evaporation. So we started doing some like quick prototype, like paper prototype testing, and seeing how that would work like in this sort of algorithmic way.
And then kind of before kind of going further, we thought we'd just test this out in open frameworks, kind of in the 2D environment. So like, you know, adding water to the environment kind of turns it into more of a wetlands. But if you add too much water, the bigger trees go away. But then you could add like evaporators, or I think you can turn it into like a desert by kind of adding too much heat and taking water away. And so we kind of thought this was interesting to sort of pursue for the next kind of prototype, as well as sort of thinking about like, how do these chains work? Like, you know, what happens if you combine like wind and water and evaporation? So this is the next prototype we made. And you could collect the different manipulators and then kind of combine them together into these sort of algorithms. So this was the algorithm mode.
What I liked about this prototype is when you actually add a creature to your pack, you're actually removing that from the environment. So if you like added water to your pack, you would quickly see the impact that that had on where you were taking it from.
But there wasn't really any objective to this to this game. It was sort of like really kind of an interesting experiment, and but we couldn't really see how to sort of take this further to the next level.
So it was like, yeah, then we went kind of back to more of the computational thinking side.
And we kind of just ended up taking a little bit of, you know, the things we like from the different environments. We really liked the procedural landscape from the previous one, and so we decided to do that for the final, but combining it with a Minecraft-y grid-based structure so that we could actually have our algorithms reference specific kind of locations.
And we also came up with the idea that the main character needed water as its lifeline. So the further away that you got from water, you'd start to fade away and then eventually die. So it was kind of a reason that you need this pack of creatures to help you maintain your water source.
So this is the final gang of creatures, and
final design, and thinking about what the assets could look like as the world transitions between day and night.
And here's the same scene between day and night. I'll just show here's an example of using your algorithm to extend some water. So you get a couple of diggers, a mover, and a repeater, and you assemble your algorithm, and then you place them next to some existing water, and you can kind of make a river or a canal. And so it goes sort of dig, dig, move, repeat, dig, dig, move, repeat. And then, you know, quickly you can see the water and kind of plants will start growing now around the river. And now that your character can travel safely across the desert, whereas before you would be kind of constrained by the water. So anyway, the game is finally out. Games are much harder than we imagined. Weirdly, even though we started off making games, they're a lot of work, and you can go download it from the App Store. It's also for desktop, mobile, and all that stuff. So I realize we're at 20 minutes now, so I might skip ahead. I don't know if we have time to do raw space, so it's too much stuff. We can always jump back to it if people say, please do the VO. So I'll end it quickly with, this is something that we recently did, kind of going back to daisies a little bit in spirit. It was for the Franklin Park Conservatory, which is like a botanical gardens. And it was meant to be sort of a companion piece for their balloons and butterflies exhibit across 3 seasons. And so we just wanted to focus on the kind of the 2 kind of main elements, and then just make it really playful and really gestural and interactive.
So here you kind of work as a pollinator.
And as the plants bloom, they release kind of butterflies that will then kind of help repollinate the environment. And the main exhibit was up for 3 months, so we sort of developed 3 different seasons for the content, like a spring, a summer, and a fall, so to kind of have sort of some variety into this. We did 3 different approaches. This is the summer style, which is sort of more kind of pen and ink, kind of hand drawn looking. So I think we're a little over 20 minutes. So I think we'll stop. And if there's any particular projects of ours or anything you want to ask, we have way more to cover there. So I'll just maybe stop the sharing right now.
Thanks so much. Wow. I've got to go. I was browsing through the site, and I would recommend everyone who's watching check out the Design.io site. I'll type it into the chat in just a moment. But I'm going to start the Q&A with a question, which I think probably a lot of people are wondering about. And that is, it's directed to both of you, and it's about how you work together. I have long been convinced in watching what you come up with that you two are a great example of the sum of the parts being greater than the whole. But could you talk to us about what kind of, when you're working on these projects, how does it work? What approach you take? Do you have defined roles or not?
A little bit. Well, at the beginning, we'll try to not be in front of the computer, and we'll come up with ideas together and sketch on paper and kind of like come up with what we want the feeling to be.
Yeah, I think
and then just chase that.
I mean, two things that we do or we try and do is, one, we always try and imagine someone else is going to make the idea that we're coming up with, concept, like when we're doing the brainstorming. Because we found that if we think too much from the implementation side, like the technical side, the design side, we kind of prematurely shut off ideas. And so we kind of think, that other Theo has to figure out how to solve this problem, but like, I think that helps a lot conceptually. And then a lot of it, I think, is push and pull. Like, Nick and I are often like, kind of like shaking our heads because Emily will ask for this like thing that's not really code and it's not really design. It's this really annoying in between. And then, when we actually pull it off, it's like, man, that feels like magic. And we're like, she was right. And so like, I think like kind of, it's this annoying thing where there's no clear defined boundary between, say, like the kind of the code and the design, that really overlaps and it gets kind of messy. And I think that's when people are kind of, they do the double take and they're like, hey, and they kind of start asking questions because they can't figure out how it works.
Yeah,
so go ahead, Emily.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think I drive he and Nick crazy, where it's like the power of programming is you can almost like apply a rule set to a large amount of things, and then I'm just like, yeah, but I just want like a few need to behave just a little bit differently. And
she ended up having Nick design a programming language that used Illustrator layer names so that Emily could write code that would then get pulled into the project.
I want to open it up to the audience for questions. People can raise your hand or enter a question in the chat. We've got Jason Lee with a question. Jason, you're on.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hi, Jason.
Here we are. Thank you for sharing all that work. I'm a big fan of all of it. I really love the museum work. I think it's a really daily inspiration that I like. There's not a day that I don't think about that museum and the water from the waterfall. So it's fantastic to hear from you both. I love that you have this consistent theme of computational thinking within your work, and I'm curious how producing your work influences your computational thinking, or if you think of them as they teach you like elements of computational thinking as you produce them. Because they, as you mentioned, they have that like, you're working in that in-between of design and implementation, and so there's that element of discovery as well. So I'm curious how you, just like if that's been the case for you, like as you solve those design problems that you create for yourself, essentially, how your computational thinking evolves.
That's a good question. I don't know, like I think kind of in a weird way, like kind of when we're doing computational thinking, the thing that I think we really, even like Nick and I, we try not to think about code too much, and we really are like, we're often looking for like outcomes and we're not looking at the process. And that might be kind of different from quite a lot of other people, but you know, sometimes the really dumb solution is like the most beautiful, the most elegant, or it has that, like, you know, with the Remnant project, we originally started with like using the laws of physics and gravitational, like the inverse square law and all these things to kind of define how the bodies interact. And it actually was really boring because it turns out like if things happen like in space, like we'd all just be smashing together, or, you know, and the planets would be colliding all the time. And so we actually had to like undo all this really clever code and write stuff that was actually far more basic to kind of get an effect that felt like kind of more magical and more artistic. So yeah, I don't know. it's kind of, you know, I think we like to bend the rules, and we try not to stick too much into our roles. And, you know, I think everyone at Design.io kind of is expected to sort of put on many different hats.
We've got a question from Colleen Macklin.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to see you. This is amazing. So I'm gonna let you choose which one to answer. I've got two questions. I can't just have one. The first one is, do you play test? And if so, how? Like, how do you have like a drawer full of small children that you have come out? And the second question is, why are games harder? Like, it seems like these big installations are quite a thing to pull off. So I was really curious about
I'll take the first one.
Okay, now I was gonna say, can I take the second one?
Good. In terms of playtesting, we try to like prototype as soon as we possibly can. And also like projecting at scale, we found is so important, even to the design process. Like I'll make just like a folder of JPEGs with colors and textures and different perspectives. And we'll just try to project at scale to get a feeling of like this works, this doesn't, and then you'll kind of find these little magical moments. And also like testing the kind of main interaction as early as we can, because it's oftentimes then that we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this, and we kind of can build on it that way. In projects where it's been like you have to submit a proposal that details exactly what the experience is before you've even done that step, we find it's so much more of a slog, because you're trying to like make it work to this idea rather than just following the play.
Yeah, we've definitely had projects where like the core idea, when we play tested it, was sort of terrible. And the really gimmicky thing that we thought that we were like, yeah, we'll probably just cut that, like we like ended up like spending half an hour playing with that and being like, why is this so good? Like, why does this feel so good? And it, you know, if you sort of like, you know, kind of try and make up your mind, Emily is actually always telling, she keeps being like, you need to play test more, you need to play test more. And she's right, whenever we do, we're like, oh, this sucks. Like, you know, and then we kind of go back to the drawing board. But we have like a couple of projectors right next to us that are like just pointing at a big blank wall, and we spend a lot of time just kind of making it dark in here and then playing and then going back and trying to fix the things.
So we've got a question in the chat, which is an interesting one, but I'm going to, I'll come back to you, Theo, and let you answer, but I'm gonna augment it. The question from Jill Shaw is, how big was your first big project, like financially, and how did you land it? But I'm gonna add to that and compare it in scope to the project you did at NYSCI.
Oh, well, I mean, this could be some radical transparency, maybe. I believe Funky Forest, we got 2,000 euros. And that was like 3.5 months of work, maybe more.
Like 20-hour days.
And you know, almost kind of getting like sleep exhaustion, you know, lack of sleep exhaustion. It's easier to live in, it's cheaper to live in Europe, so that's maybe part of it. And I think the nice side, the total budget, but that included construction, equipment, like it included $1 million worth of projectors. I think the total budget was like $3.5 million. And that took about 3.5 years. and you know, I mean, it was, I don't think we made any money on that project, or we covered our expenses. But so, you know, our kind of projects range. You know, I always, the thing we miss about the US, about Europe, is that in Europe you could get like budgets to make things for festivals. Like if you're starting out and you're just beginning, you know, for us, 1,000 euros or 2,000 euros was a lot of money, and that was like, you know, 2 months rent. So we could, it was really worth it for us, but it also allowed us to build our portfolio. And, you know, I think we keep saying if we had stayed in the US, we probably wouldn't have been able to sort of build the portfolio we did in Amsterdam. So I think we need more of the smaller funding opportunities here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now, Theo, you get to go back and answer Colleen's second question.
I'm excited for this answer too.
Games.
Repeat the question first for the audience.
Okay. So the question was, why are games so hard? And I don't think I have the perfect answer, but I will say that, you know, our installations are typically kind of open-ended experiences where there's not a lot of structure. It's a system, you know, you're kind of letting people play with the system. Games combine like a system, storytelling, puzzles, problem solving, and kind of onboarding, and like all these different aspects that are tedious and miserable and really frustrating. And you can take such a long time to get to the point where you're like, this doesn't work. And then you kind of, you know, have to go back and like find that thing.
I think what we were going for was the same kind of feeling where it was an open world. You weren't on rails. We were trying to give control to the user. But like, yeah, how do you have this sort of story arc? How do you know then, like, what's the end when you're not in control of this ship? And I feel like that's what the hard part was.
That is really hard, because we were trying to do open-ended, you know, storytelling in an open world but still have enough structure.
You basically tried to make the hardest kind of game to make. Like, I think that's also
as our first game. Yeah.
But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I have it and I love it. And so yeah.
So we have a longish question from Sharm, Sharm is actually incapable of asking a shortish question, but I'll read it. It makes sense, actually. In your projects, as you progress and play test, maybe newer concepts emerge. How do you go about trying to integrate those new concepts into your current project's workflow and progress with a deadline on the horizon? Do you scrap that new concept and try it later on another project? Or what method do you go about trying to implement a new concept to an existing design?
I feel like if when new things come up, it's usually because we're finding that it's supporting what the goal is. So we will try to integrate that if we can.
Yeah, we've had projects that like the original concept to the final thing is like the straightest straight lines. And then we've had some other projects where like we're constantly, like right now we're working on a project where we basically made, it's a project about molten glass, and we basically kind of got to the point where we made what was in the concept sketch that we had sort of submitted. And then we were just playing with this and we're like, this isn't very fun. and so now we're literally in the process of kind of scrapping about 3 or 4 months work and playing with stuff that like much more kind of gestural expressive stuff that is a little bit more looser, kind of tied to in connection with the concept. And we were playing with it the other day and Emily couldn't stop playing with it. And, we were like, okay, this is clearly better, So
it's like all the components are there, but just treated in a very different manner.
Yeah, so that, I mean, it often involves pushing our deadlines. But,
Okay. I'm going to go back now to a question that was asked a few moments ago on the chat from Clarence Ma, who simply asks, what's your main advice for students trying to pursue work in this field?
Well, I think I would say that my ideal scenario would be to suggest that you find a festival or a client, even if you can just cover your expenses, something where you can kind of get your foot in the door at a very small scale and to sort of prove that you can do this sort of work. To me, it's always helpful to have like an audience at the end of the day, because it's very motivating in terms of getting work done. I also think it's really important to learn how to document your work, and this I learned this from Evan Roth, because he put as much effort into the documentation as the project itself. And we have projects that we love that no one has ever seen because we didn't have the time to shoot video, or we shot video, but the video wasn't very good. And so like the big life lesson is the project exists in your documentation. It doesn't exist in the world. And I was teaching a class in the Netherlands, and I actually told my students that I was going to grade them on the documentation of their work, not on their work, even if I saw their work in person, as just a sort of way to really kind of make that point. And I said, if you fake the documentation and you can make me believe that the project's real, you'll get the same grade. And so, I don't know, I think that's a very important skill, is learning how to like present your work and share your work.
I think also for starting out, just give yourself like smaller tasks and just start, trying to make a little prototype and share that online, and look for people who you could potentially collaborate with who have a skill set that you don't, and seeing what you could do together, because it's often those, like, I think those overlapping spaces that are interesting.
Yeah, definitely collaboration, I think, is a big one, like finding a nice team of people to work with,
or kind of like falling in love with someone you can work with. That's like I thought that was going to be yeah. Okay, we've got a question here from Amber, who asks, are there other areas or disciplines that you have strong interests or backgrounds in which you feel combine well with your work in design? For example, I'm strongly interested in psychology and come from a poli-sci background. She's just curious about your own personal hobbies and interests and how they intersect with your work.
Well, for me, it's like storytelling. Like my whole like dream would be to be able to walk into my favorite children's books or like a favorite movie that I have, and be able to control it. Like if they don't stay in a scene as long as I want to, like I can hang out like on a windswept Miyazaki hill or something for as long as I want. So for me, that kind of chasing how you can play with story is something that is important to me.
I think for me, I mean, nature is clearly a big influence in our work. And, you know, I think we're kind of like the nervous systems people, Jesse and Jessica, we're just like obsessed with sort of the natural world and like how it kind of is effectively like programmatic in its own way. Architecture is also another big one. And like, I always kind of think about how architecture can shape our brains and the way as children, like the way, like the spaces you grow up in, like how that actually can affect your development. And my dream is like a city where all the buildings are interactive and they're just playing with you. But yeah, I think architecture, nature, and sound are like my big kind of side passions.
Yeah, I would throw out when Colleen and I first met you, Theo, you were seen as a musician. I remember walking down, you will not even remember this. I remember walking down the street in Brooklyn one day and you came up to me on a sidewalk and said, "Look what I found." And you had found in some dumpster a small synthesizer keyboard. And I said, "Whoa, you know, okay." And you said, "Yeah, I'll definitely use it for something." And you walked along. But, you know, anyway, we've known you for too long now.
Yeah.
Okay, Giannis asks, are there any legal aspects or liabilities? Also, he referring to the institution review board type limitations, since your work engages directly with human beings. And I would restate this by saying, you know, what kind of clearance do you have to do before you make these installations where in particular kids are running into them and interacting?
That's a good question. You know, in the Netherlands, there were no rules. And, you know, we would ask people if is this safe? And they're like, "Are you going to trip on it?"
Like taping down cables and they're like, "Why are you doing that? Are you going to like?"
Yeah. But the normal rules don't apply in the Netherlands. Somehow everybody remains safe. I mean, this is sort of more of the boring aspect of the work, but it's a real thing. And we don't install any hardware ourselves.
For that reason.
Yeah, we basically hire or subcontract out all the AV rigging and projector hanging, because that's like heavy stuff that can fall on children. And then, you know, I think the robot arm project we did in Canada, we had to build like a system where like if any children like reached over the barrier, it would immediately come to a stop, which is like, you know, normally it works the other way around. So it wasn't a perfect solution, but we really try and avoid kind of anything where like our main responsibility is software. It's not usually like physical things that will touch people. So we're
aware of like strobing lights and like purposefully not designing VR experiences for children.
One time I was doing that Michel Gondry installation at Deutsch Projects, and I did all the electrical wiring myself, having taught myself a couple of days before. And I almost managed to burn down the Deutsch gallery because I'd used too thin a gauge of wire and I was running like thousands of watts through it. So yeah, that was a lesson that I learned very early on.
I'm gonna do something here that we don't usually do, but could you guys? I'm really curious about this robot arm you keep referring to. Do you have any slides of this project?
Can you bring it actually up? Yeah. Yeah, I have it right here. Let me share screen. And it's, yeah, you can, I think you'll see it. I'll jump, well, I'll show the picture first, and then, so this is what it looked like when it was finished. But this was some of the sort of early stuff we were doing at Golan's lab at Carnegie Mellon, sort of playing with. Oh, I have a good video of Golan nodding his head to this robot.
And the idea was to kind of like build a rapport with this robot where it would kind of look at you in terms of like, it's like timid,
trust,
yeah, playfulness. So you, over time, you could have more of a playful interaction with it.
This head thing, the shaking of the head, was actually a bug in the code, but we then had to keep it because we really liked how the wobble, like how it looked. Let me see if I can find Golan. We kind of stored the feelings the robot had for you in each person, so that like if Emily walked in and she hadn't seen the robot before, it would look at her with like it would be very timid, but if I'd been playing with it, it would have a lot of trust and kind of more interaction with me. So you can see some of this stuff. But I want to jump to Golan quickly. I don't think he's cleared this clip. We had it so that it would mimic your behavior. So it's like you could bend, nod your head and it would nod.
I remember he did a piece that, something called Snout or something like that he installed on the roof.
Yeah, I mean, his early work is sort of big inspiration for this. We're trying to stress test the robot, but so here it sort of caught me, and now it's going back to Golan. And then I think we kept breaking it.
So did this get installed somewhere in the end?
It did. It was installed in Toronto at a festival in Toronto. Here you can see our safety system.
You got paid 2,000 euros for this one?
More for that one.
a little more of it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we maybe have time for one more question. Anyone want to shout something out from the audience, or ask a final question?
Yes, if anyone wants to give us a robot arm, we're in desperate need of one.
Did Golan own the robot arm? Why was it in his lab?
I think that was part of the studio, but he managed to connect us with the company to borrow one for the exhibition.
Okay, I'm going to ask the final question, and this again dates me in terms of you all. And Emily, forgive me, but it's more a Theo specific question. But
fun.
chime in. Theo, with all of your early work with open frameworks, and that's another interesting thing about seeing Golan and all of the work nearly. Good Lord, it's a long time ago, guys. Nearly 2 decades ago. And also, moving beyond there to wonderful stuff you did with graffiti research lab, stuff like this. Do you see a separation between that and what has become Design.io, or does it feel like a fairly natural flow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the kind of my early projects were sort of, I felt like they kind of got to the limits of what I could do on my own. And I think a lot of my projects were a little less kind of illustrative or kind of immersive as a result, because I didn't really have such a good visual background. And so I feel like in a way Design.io is like allowed us to sort of like really actually kind of create the future that we want to live in, and like also create the future for like the next generation of people. And so, I just love that kids can like grow up and be like, yeah, they're just interactive forests, or like I'm just controlling like giant robots, or I kind of like working in a kind of an area that's a bit more accessible. But I think I think it would be fun to sort of explore some sort of, even within Design.io, some work that feels out of our comfort zone. And I think
we've got a great finishing question here from Edison. So I'm going to read it. And it's perfect for what you're saying. What are the next aspirations for your art? Like, where do you want to go next? Or are your projects based on your next clients or opportunities? So it's kind of a two-sided question, but really I'll rephrase it and say, where are you headed? Do you have any big projects on the horizon or things you really want to do, even if you're not getting paid for them?
That list is like miles long.
Actually, games, like Emily keeps coming up with these amazing game ideas. And, you know, I think ideally we would like to do it, have spin off a games division, also like a product division for kind of toys and kind of design accessories and stuff like that. I would love to do some work that works with the sun as a light source and sort of like moving away from projectors, but thinking about like installations that could work with shadows and more natural processes. But I don't know, I think
it is like at the moment, I feel like where we have been following more recently the path of what projects have come our way rather than
the projects. And that's another piece of advice. Like I would say, like, always take off the work off your website that you don't want to do again. And that way, like, people will never ask you to make it.
I think we'll close there. We're right on 8 o'clock. A big thanks to Emily and Theo for taking the time tonight. Just wonderful to see you. And I think I speak for everyone in saying it's just a really joyous experience to see what you're working on and keep on going. So big applause for you guys. For everyone else, pass on that we record these and they'll be up on, I think, probably our YouTube channel at some point. But Emily, Theo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's lovely to see both you and Colleen again. And it's as if it was 20 years ago. It's like nothing changed.
That is scary, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And there were we had Scott Patterson, we had Todd Vanderlyn out here. There's some folks from the days showing up.
All right, everybody. We're gonna call it close here. Thanks for coming. We'll see you all in a couple of weeks at our next session. And good night. And everyone get vaccinated as soon as you can. I qualify now. Yeah. They just changed it to 60 in New York and I'm 61. So anyway, I'll end with that.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hello, Sven.
Hey, Sharon. How you doing?
Good. Just want to say hi to you because I have a long time I didn't see you.
Yeah, let's meet at a different meeting. It's amazing. We've got a lot of people showing up. They must have come at the wrong time. It's wild. Anyway, I'm going to sign off here, but good night to everyone.
Good night. Bye.